Welcome to the All Things Cyber video blog. Today we're on episode 3, the insight from the Insurer, and I'm pleased to have Duncan Pease here with me from Axis Capital. Duncan is the head of Cyber Claims International. He's an experienced claims handler and manager with 40 years of experience in the insurance market and extensive background dealing with cyber insurance claims. Good morning, Duncan, or good afternoon for you. How are you doing?
Yeah, good morning, Spencer. I'm very well, thank you.
And thank you so much for being here. Let's jump right into it. We were discussing earlier or yesterday about a news article I read about another ransomware attack in a municipality in America. This time it was in Texas at the Department of Transportation. Are we seeing a huge uptick in ransomware, or what's kind of keeping you up at night, and has it changed with COVID?
Well, ransomware is definitely one of the prevalent threats at the moment. We're seeing a lot of it. We've noticed a ramp up in the level of demands, also in the tactics that the attackers deploy. So increasingly, we're seeing them go after big game targets. So state departments, like the example you gave in the Texas case, large corporates, any companies with a high turnover. And we found that the attacks are usually preceded by some sort of Trojan, like TrickBot or Emotet, which are kind of designed to steal data. It can move laterally through a company's systems and servers, and it's able to drop a payload of ransomware, such as Ryuk or Maze ransomware, into critical areas of the system, which can then just encrypt all of your data and quite often reach your backups as well. We've seen 2 recent examples of Maze ransomware, where we've seen demands of 10 million. And the hallmark of those attacks is that the group generally steals the data, then encrypts the systems, and they kind of use that as an insurance policy against companies that refuse to pay because they feel they can restore from backups. So it puts them in quite a difficult position. And these attacks can have a devastating impact on the operations of the company and the business income. Even if you pay the ransom and you obtain the encryption keys, it can take weeks to fully restore the systems. During that time of restoration, the company is often incurring extra expense. They might be sustaining reputational damage. Sometimes the customers start to leave. And if there's been customer data taken from the system, then almost certainly you're going to have to inform those customers and the regulators. And I think the interesting thing is that most of these ransomware attacks and a lot of the other attacks originate through phishing emails, normally with some sort of malicious attachment or a link. And according to a recent study I was reading, they reckon that phishing emails are probably behind about 38% of cyber attacks, which is a very high proportion. So, why, from an attacker's point of view, why go to the effort of a brute force attack when you can, get someone to let you into the system? And once in, they can harvest the data. Either they can use it immediately, or they use it to build bigger attacks later on, maybe against your customers. So we found that the targets can be just any employee, or it could be key staff or individuals within the company with broader access permissions like HR, IT or finance. Once they're in, they can manipulate the email accounts. They can change the financial data in your accounting systems. That enables them to commit fund transfer frauds. And also, if they can manipulate your email account, then you'll quite often see a campaign of follow-up spoofing emails, which are designed to mimic staff or suppliers or customers. And they're normally accompanied by some kind of an instruction, to send money somewhere, that kind of thing, or to send goods to a false address. So beware of those kind of requests is my message. If you get a request to send money to different bank details or deliver goods to a different address, then you have on record then you should be suspicious and do your own independent checks to verify that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
I was
go
going to
ahead.
say there's one less obvious threat which I think is worth mentioning, and that's really the increasing data regulation that we're seeing developing worldwide. That places quite heavy obligations on companies that are handling other people's data. So we saw the General Data Protection Regulation across Europe in 2018. More recently in California, we've seen the California Consumer Privacy Act. And all of these regulations carry with them fairly heavy fines and penalties for regulatory breaches. And coupled with that, we've seen a raft of data protection statutes like the Biometric Information Privacy Act in Illinois, Telephone Consumer Protection Act, which is across all states, and violations of those laws can invite statutory damages, even if you've not caused any harm by your violation. And these can be really, really costly for a company. Often you're looking at fixed damages of say $1,000 per violation. And if you've got 200,000 members in a class action, you're looking at a $200 million claim, just for a technical violation. And the thing is, this is actually one thing a business can have some control over. If you're breached, that's a different story. But in terms of complying with regulations, that is totally within the control of a company, just through proper governance.
You touched on a lot of points that keep me up at night, especially the shifting landscape in the laws and the regulations. Obviously we've seen such a seismic move in the past couple years, and trying to advise clients to keep up with the compliance is always a challenge. The other part that you touched on is the phishing campaign. In talking to a lot of clients recently, they've seen a huge uptick in this phishing attacks. What are you seeing in terms of, or have you seen this phishing attacks increase because of COVID and the current pandemic, or what are the threat landscape you've seen with COVID?
It's a difficult one because there's been a lot of media attention on the subject, and headlines get attention. And yes, there have been reported attacks on, say, medical and research facilities, and we have seen evidence of phishing campaigns to exploit the pandemic. But I would say the reality for us so far has been we've seen a handful of phishing email claims where there's been a COVID-19 reference within the subject, and obviously malicious links. But I would say for businesses, potentially this time it does make them more vulnerable to attacks. So you've got the challenges of remote working while people are in lockdown. A company has to secure their networks for those kind of working arrangements, maybe by setting up virtual private networks, maybe introducing multi-factor passwords. But there's an increased use of personal devices from people in lockdown, particularly in some companies, and that carries with it its own set of security problems. And also you've got the natural curiosity of people about the virus. So if they see an email which has a link or an attachment to it and an interesting strapline, people are going to be possibly fooled into clicking on those attachments. And there you are, once you're in the system, we've seen what can happen. And I would say that whilst we're not seeing an instant impact from coronavirus, it is a perfect time for criminals to be exploiting those kind of vulnerabilities through scattergun campaigns in personal and business environments and across all sectors. So the potential is that they can harvest millions of pieces of data, information, and contact information during that time. And this is possibly setting up the criminals for the launch of larger, more sophisticated and organised attacks in the months and years to come. Because the modus operandi is really to build up lots of little pieces of data to build up a bigger picture of a company. And once you've done that, it's much easier to get to that company. And in a year or so down the line, it's going to be almost impossible to trace these attacks back to this period in time.
Yeah, it's a scary thought that some of the hackers are basically sitting and waiting, and that, as you just said, in a year, then we're going to have a huge uptick and see a massive swing of it. $100 million question. I'm a company, I'm an organization. All of a sudden, I get to my desk. I'm the CEO. My computer is frozen. I get a message on it from a hacker, ransomware attack, or supposing highly unusual activity where my IT department has detected an intrusion. What should I do?
Okay, well, if you purchased cyber insurance, then most policies will have an instant response line in that policy, like a hotline. I would say use that, because really it's your lifeline. You get access to 24/7 breach coach. These are really experienced professionals who can, one, take the panic out of the situation. They can find out a little bit about the situation. They can put you in touch with the right experts to assist you. That might be IT forensics, it might be public relations people, and of course the breach coaches can advise you on any regulatory obligations you might have, because you have a very short time frame to notify the regulator in these circumstances. I would say make sure you keep your insurance details and details of the hotline separate from your main systems, because it's no good to you if they're locked up in encrypted systems. So do keep them separate. But I would say the vital thing for any company faced with the kind of dilemma that you've just described is to respond quickly. So do that through a hotline, or if you're not insured, look up sort of breach coaches within the area to get that guidance. And if you can respond quickly and restore your critical systems first, even if you can't, actually get all of them back up online, do the critical ones first, because it gets you back in business quicker and it lessens the impact of the incident. I would also say, again, if you are insured, make sure you give prompt notice to your insurers, because they can help. They've handled many of these incidents before. They have access to experienced vendors and advisors. A lot of policies require prior consent provisions before you incur any costs. So, if you notify your insurers quickly, they can authorize those breach response costs for you and get your IT investigations underway quickly. And make sure you keep a continuing dialogue with your insurers. That's really important, because they will request information to enable them to understand the event. And if you're nervous about providing information, if it's really sensitive, and there's a possibility you're going to be in the public eye, then you can always ask for a non-disclosure agreement or a confidentiality agreement for your insurer to sign. But if you follow these steps, then you should get a quicker coverage determination and quicker reimbursement of your expenses.
Can you touch briefly, when you talk about a breach coach, to help the audience some insight about how they would find a breach coach, say if they don't have insurance at this moment and something would happen?
Well, I mean, the internet's a wonderful thing now. So actually, you could probably just Google, breach counsel, breach coach, data breach counsel. You should be able to come up with, you'll get a lot of results come back. I think the key is to not leave it until you have a data breach. I think the key is to do these investigations now. And if you are thinking about purchasing cyber insurance, then discuss the options with your insurers, because they have panels of these guys who are tried and tested. Mm-hmm. They know they're good. They've worked with them before. So, if you are thinking about purchasing insurance, talk to your insurers and they'll give you some advice. But as I say, you can look these things up, and a lot of solicitors now, attorneys, are offering these kind of services, but they are specialist services. Mm-hmm.
And then the one thing you discussed there was basically trying to stay ahead of the threats, because everybody I've talked to in the industry, and what I've seen is there's obviously no foolproof way to stop a data breach or a hacker from getting in. So one thing I tell my clients is the proactive approach is the best approach to the prevention and mitigation of these harms.
Yeah.
What could you kind of advise a business to do to take a proactive approach to best prevent and mitigate potential harms from a data breach or hacker?
There's a number of things you can do. I would say, first off, knowing your data regulations and avoiding any own goals, because that, as I say, is something that is entirely within a company's control to overcome. And the governance starts with the C-suite. But one of the things the C-suite can do, and as we just discussed, is engage with breach counsel or a breach coach before you have an event to advise on things like data security policies, compliance with the data regulations which are relevant to your operations. That might not necessarily be ones within your immediate vicinity, within your immediate state. It could be GDPR if you're doing business in Europe as well. So get advice on that up front so you're ready for it and you can comply. The breach counsel can advise you on vendor selection. These are all the various experts that can help you through a breach and how to vet those. And I think also make sure you do due diligence on any external contractors to make sure they comply, because through vicarious liability, you could be responsible for the actions of your contractors. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to make sure that they're complying as well. And taking an analogy, if you're a company, you're going to take out, you're going to protect your property, aren't you, against fire? And if you protect your business, you can protect your business against cyber risk just as you would against fire risk. So, in a fire scenario, you would start off with a fire safety survey. Well, the cyber equivalent of that would be getting someone to do penetration testing on your systems to make sure that they're secure, to identify any vulnerabilities that exist, which can then be patched up and strengthened. You'd probably have some sort of evacuation procedures for the building if there is a fire. Well, the cyber equivalent of that would be having an incident response plan. Make sure you know what you would do, which key personnel would be involved in addressing that. Who from IT? Would it be a finance guy? Would it be the CEO? Make sure you've got a plan in place, and that's something that a breach counsel can help you with. And actually, your insurers probably have panels of people who can help you with that as well. You would probably have periodic fire drills to make sure that everything should run smoothly and to find out what might go wrong. In a cyber scenario, there are tabletop simulations that you can do. So these are simulated, staged cyber attacks where everyone kind of has a role play, and it immediately highlights any areas where the company is maybe unprepared, and then they can advise you on how to patch those those vulnerabilities. So there's nothing like a cyber fire drill to actually take you through a scenario. And just as you would buy fire insurance, you can buy cyber insurance as well. And I think the last couple of things, work with your insurers, because they do have pre-agreed vendor panels. You can either use the insurers panel firms, you might want to use some of your own, or you might do a hybrid of the two, but make sure you agree those with the insurer up front, because you don't want to be agreeing these things in the midst of an attack when every minute and second counts. And make sure you understand your policy and what you need to do. And you can, don't be afraid to ask your broker to set up a call or a meeting with your insurers pre-inception, because they can run you through how the policy works, some of the things to particularly look out for. We quite often get questions about particular clauses in the policy and how they operate, and we can help to give clarity around those if they're unsure of those. And lastly, firstly, make sure you have backups to your system, and do make sure that they're configured properly so that they are truly separate from your main systems. Because if the attackers get to your backups as well, you really are at their mercy. So yeah, make sure they're configured properly.
Duncan, that was very informative, very interesting. A lot of good stuff there for people to jump on. If somebody wanted to learn more about Access Capital and their potential offerings, how could they do that?
The easiest thing probably is to go onto our website, or you can access us through brokers, your local agents. But I would say first off, go through our website.
Wonderful. Duncan, thank you again for being here and being a part of the show.
Okay, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. This is All Things Cyber. I'm Spencer Pollock, attorney from Niles, Barton, and Wilmer, and we'll see you for episode 4.